Hey everybody, welcome to the Big Liberty Show, a special show to you, a new show that I'm debuting here. It's called Blacks Only. That's right, a nice controversial name for you. And no, it is not a social justice warrior identitarian iteration. It is a play on essentially the obsession in society with race. But what I want to show you here today is something a little bit special. Yes, the show will have Black South Africans mostly, but we're not the same. We're not a monolith. We're not a homogeneous grouping of people as the identity merchants and the social justice warriors would have you believe. No, of course not. What we are is a diverse grouping of individuals, so that even if we share the aesthetic trait of having black skin or being from the same parts of the world, doesn't mean that we are the same in our thinking. And this show, Blacks Only, here on the Big Liberty Show, will feature regular contributors to the show who are diverse in their thought, and all of whom lean on the side of liberty, though, but within a varied rather spectrum of worldviews and thoughts. I'll have conservatives on the show, I'll have libertarians, I'll have anarchists even, a wide diverse grouping of people, and we'll be chatting current affairs, what's going on in a very chilled fashion, so that you can also learn a thing or two. I know I'm excited, I'll be learning quite a few things, and I'm looking forward to that. Now, without me waffling on and on and on my first show here today, I have very special guests with me. Chaps, welcome to the Big Liberty Show, Blacks Only. I've got Umpiake Kaminu, who is a researcher at the Free Market Foundation. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good.
Hey, tada. And I have Dumo Denga. Dumo Denga was with, you're with the ZACP for a while.
That is
correct.
correct.
You are a finance guru and, quite accomplished dude in that regard. Guys, welcome to the show. As I said in my little intro here, there is this misconception about Black South Africans in South Africa that somehow we're all the same. We are often assumed to be leftist or left-leaning, socialist, but that's just simply not true, isn't it,
No, it's not. It's not. I mean, if we just need to go out there to see the diversity that's out there, even within some of the, let's say, a party like the EFF, even there's a lot of diversity of thought and a lot of, so that people don't. I think a lot of people don't have enough confidence yet to break out of whatever tribal grouping they've sort of chosen, or they've chosen whatever party.
Yeah.
And you just sort of identify with it, no matter what your own personal views are. So, but we can get into that.
No, absolutely. Yeah. No, but you're raising very important points though about often who is behind the. Because it doesn't just happen by chance, right? It's not like, we've just been assumed to be the same. No, there are active voices, people with vested interests who push that narrative for whatever reason, often a political one, to be honest, and people who then trade on race in particular, who are the ones who want to make the narrative, want to push the narrative, if you will, that we're all the same. Dumo, welcome to the show. This is such a touchy topic, isn't it? To a lot of people who, especially if you watch traditional media, let me be specific. Yeah. If you watch and listen to traditional media, most radio hosts, most of these analysts that we listen to trade on identity. They're very immersed in the sort of current thinking, if you will, which stems from universities, and really it's American concepts, if one is to be honest, yes, of critical race theory, intersectionality or intersectionalism. That's the thing about these academic jargons. It's usually made up concepts. Before maybe I come to Dumo, I want to just open up another can of worms very, very quickly. Actually, even before any of that, let me start the show off where I want to start it off. Who am I talking to here? Who are these people here? I'm going to start with you, Dumo, on this one. Dumo, tell me a bit about yourself. Who are you? Where are you from? And then maybe segue into what are your influences, right? And how do you view this world? How would you describe yourself?
Okay, my name is Dumo, of course. What I am doing right now, I got my own podcast called the Man Patriot Podcast, and it's a libertarian podcast. Yep. And in that podcast, I discuss philosophical issues economics and social issues as well. And it's what I like to do. I do it all the time. I like to speak about it. But how I view the world is that I view every human being as an individual, and I think that every individual has unique abilities, and that we should give human beings freedom. I do not believe in having very authoritarian governments. I believe
you and I both.
I believe in the freedom of choice on many issues as well. And I just think that also human beings, we also have like kind of set behaviors on certain things. So we are driven by incentives, and I believe in creating an environment where the right incentives are created as well. So that's pretty much me in a nutshell: human freedom, good incentives, and let's go from there.
Before I pepper you with questions, Mpiake, maybe you can also set out, who is Mpiake Gamini? Where's he from? What are his influences? How does he view the world?
So my name is Mpiake Gamini. Like you've said, I'm currently live here in Johannesburg, but I'm originally from KZN, Newcastle. So
Homie?
So that's how I view the world. I believe strongly in spontaneous order to the extent that I think it alone is enough to govern the world. So I'm an anarchist. I don't believe that you need any central direction or any central control unless it's voluntary. You don't need to impose force on anyone to make good things happen, whatever the conception of good is, which is solely dependent on the individual. I also believe in one of the most important rules of economics is that value is subjective. Which, if you think about it deeply, meditate on it, will sort of gel with the idea that everyone is an individual. That you cannot sort of come in from outside and say this is what this person should be aiming for. You should really ask that person what they want themselves.
Absolutely.
And you shouldn't. And in that way, whenever you have some amount of force, whenever it might sound a little bit, you might say we might need the government for just protect this border, protect ourselves against our neighbors who might attack us. But then you will have a neighbor on the border who's actually say, hey, that other guy who wants to attack us now is going to treat me better than this other guy.
Right,
so
right.
I sort of believe that there's no need for a government really, because as long as individuals, you need maximum freedom for individuals, and then they can choose for themselves what they want to do with their lives, what they want to go, and all of that.
Yeah. Okay, I think anybody who's listening that's going, an anarchist, what is that? What is anarchy? Does it mean you want warlords running across the streets and shooting up? Because a common criticism from the left, and those who just don't understand, they'll be like, oh, so you want us to live like in Mogadishu, where there's just warlords running certain areas? Like, what is anarchy?
Anarchy, in its the most simplest ways to describe it, is the absence of a government. Now, as an anarchist, you have to go deeper in the net. You have to say what is actually this thing called government.
Absolutely, hit us. I'm all ears.
If you really think about government, it is the idea that individuals can have their property expropriated against their will for the purpose of sustaining an organization that purpose to serve some common shared interest. Now, that is what I'm against, this force. I'm not against organization. I'm not against hierarchical organization. I'm just against this idea that you can force people to be part of an organization or of some that tells them basically what to do with their property through that's what we call taxation, where your property is taken away from you, expropriation without compensation, and you have no say in the matter.
Because that's what government really is, isn't it? It's ultimately, yes, it's often framed in the language of being this wonderful organization that is for the people, by the people. But really, if you don't listen or agree to a dictate that's given to you by government, there's very serious and very violent consequences, aren't there? I think people sometimes forget that government power is backed by guns and violence.
Exactly, and at the end of that, it might start out by, okay, we'll point a gun at you, we'll take you to prison, but at the ultimate end, if you resist all of those other intermediate steps, the ultimate end, it will be your life. Any government, all governments on earth will take your life if you resist them well enough.
Dumo, I think anybody listening at this point might go, okay, so Mpiake is clearly on the I won't call it the far end, because I think there's farther ends, if anything.
To my surprise, yes.
excuse me. Piake basically says, hey, no government. Do you share that view, or do you believe there should be a role for some form of government? Like, how would you look at the role of government?
I think, for me, the role of government is one where there has to be some sort of balance between the people and the government. Now, obviously, from a theoretical perspective, that sounds great, but how do you put that in practical terms? So I think, from my experience, what I've seen is that, especially if you look at the United States and their history, how they have changed their constitution so many times so that they can ensure that the people and the government have, I wouldn't say equal power, but there is some sort of resistance that
almost checks and balances, and power resides within as much as possible within the hands of individuals.
Exactly, and that's the thing. So I think that going back to the role of government, I just feel that it has to be limited. It has to be extremely limited because we don't want a tyranny. But then the anarchist might say, well, no government, then there's no tyranny. So I think, I may lean towards that side and understand where it's coming from.
Yeah.
But I still think that, we still need some form of it. But it has to be extremely limited. And there has to be also, if the government wants to expand its power, like we're seeing now with this expropriation of land without compensation.
Yeah, we'll get into that, absolutely.
By changing the constitution, I think that's very unfair, because now you may say elected individuals in power making these, rules, but it's not in the best interest of people. And how do people resist that correctly? So that's another challenge that I also see with having a government, is that even though you want to keep it small, how do you keep it small? Because they can just expand, and they don't have anyone to answer to. So so I believe in small government, but as long as you can keep that small, then I'm good.
Yeah. As I said, this is what I wanted, right?
Yeah.
So for people to see that actually there is a very wide spectrum of views by even those who lean on the side of liberty, as we do. Because my view, for example, around government is, I always do things in threes, right? So when the question of the role of government comes up, I always go, look, the role of government is essentially three things. One, it should be to protect us from foreign aggression, and Milton Friedman would be a school of thought that the Chicago school of thought is perhaps where I am. So the first role of government, if I were to ascribe there being a need for one, is, well, look, it should be protecting citizens from foreign aggression. So there should be a standing army and some form of diplomatic corps that protects the integrity of a nation state, right? I do still believe that, you can and should have a nation state. So you need an army, et cetera, et cetera. And the second role should be, is to protect us from internal threats. And that can be a threat against, so basically criminality, because any society should be founded on the rule of law. That it is that same principle which also determines the extent and the nature of government's powers. They should be codified in law in a constitutional democracy. So essentially, the state then should have a role in protecting us against criminality, those who want to break the law, to infringe either on our life or our property. So someone who steals your phone, or someone who wants to stab you because you had a bar fight the previous evening. That's very specifically clear. Anyway, and obviously the third one, obviously I would put it to you guys, the third one should be, mediating our disputes. I mean, we're a country of 55 million people, 11 different languages, various cultures. Of course, there'll be disagreement and some form of conflict every now and then, which is why I argue you still need that principle of the rule of law, specifically the law of contracts, that all relationships in society should be governed by a contract, right? And if you think about it, they already are. So technically there's a contract between even us here, technically right now, right? An agreement that you will give of your time voluntarily to be here. You're not forced. This is not a statist show. You're not forced to be here.
There's no guy with a gun over there.
Exactly, like a commissar just standing there in overalls. Ooh, see what I did there. But yeah, like it's voluntary and we're cooperating. That's what a society should be. Like individuals voluntarily cooperating to make great things happen. And I'm hoping the show is great. I'm hoping you guys will enjoy it. So it's those three things, right? So having a judiciary that can then arbitrate our disputes and essentially enforce contracts. Those three things. Biaki, your thoughts on that as an anarchist?
Well, I agree that I agree on the need for a rule of law. I agree on the need to protect property against foreign or domestic threats. I mean, in my conception, there is no distinction between foreign and domestic, but anyway. Yeah. And then I also agree on the need on the need for contracts to be respected. And if you look at all those three things, and then you consider that, for example, in the world now, there are 200 sovereign states.
Yeah.
So out of those 207 states, it means there are some 200 plus sovereigns, which means like heads of states. And how do those people, mediate disputes among themselves? How do those people decide that if Donald Trump feels that China is being aggressive against the USA?
We'll get into that too.
How does he defend against that? I mean, how does Donald Trump defend himself against? Any threat really. So I think there's the fact that you have sovereign states that don't have any any government that sits above those states. All of them are co-equal essentially in international law, and they work through through means like arbitration. So in treaties work on the basis of arbitration. So like a treaty will be signed, and a procedure for mediating the disputes, if any arise, will be agreed upon, and that will be respected. And that's why you don't have many wars now, because we have institutions that handle
Absolutely.
that now. And so I want interactions between individuals. What's good for the goose must be good for the gander.
Absolutely.
And so what's good for the politicians who run states should be good for us as individuals. We are just as good as them. We are able to respect contracts as much as them. We are able to build the necessary arbitration institutions to mediate disputes among ourselves
and to take responsibility and self-ownership of ourselves.
Yes.
No, I fully agree. Yeah. Guys, as we maybe chew the fat on this and narrow down to our particular worldviews, and I just want to throw something into the pot, the figurative pot that we're creating here, the dish, and see what you guys say. So, in this country, race is at least amongst those who are race obsessed and who trade on identity, these identitarians, as I call them, they'll argue, here's a room full of black individuals, we're victims, right? According to them, we are victims, so there's this weird thing. Let me just conceptualize my thoughts properly here and channel the arguments properly. Okay. So if you are a identitarian, you'll view people not as individuals, you view them as blocks, various blocks that are based on their identity. So it can be gender, race, their income levels, because that's the other thing, because a lot of this is also rooted in Marxism. So it still wants to play that idea that there is a society of the haves and the have-nots. Historically, in terms of classical Marxism, that was, the proletariat and the bourgeoisie, and that relationship was characterized by oppression, or rather exploitation, right? That was the classical Marxism. A lot of these ideas, because they're drawn from Marxism, slightly they amend that relationship, and they say, well, instead of it being a class analysis or a class struggle, it's one based on identity, right? So there's still that relationship of oppression and exploitation, but now they'll argue that instead of the bourgeoisie, you have white individuals, or rather white people, and whiteness, because they're very careful around how they corrupt language. So they say, no, we don't have a problem with white people, we have a problem with whiteness, right? And they'll call whiteness as being this hegemonic, oppressive, and exploitative thing or identity. And black people, because they're happy to say black people when it comes to us, and blackness, if you will, which is on the receiving end of that we are oppressed, we are victims, et cetera, et cetera. So that's how essentially cultural Marxism has amended classical Marxism. And then from that, you have various theories, critical race theory, and critical theory just generally, and intersectionality, which again, basically identify either race, critical race theory, or intersectionality, will argue that there's a confluence of things, race, gender, where you're from, blah, 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 which determine whether you're a victim or you're oppressed or you're an oppressor. Invariably, it's always white cishet males that are the oppressors. Anyway, that was a very long about way of me getting to a particular question. We're sitting in this room here today. I think most of us here, I don't know, I'm going to assume I was born in the 80s, sort of mid-80s. Any 90s fellas? So I'm the only one. Oh my goodness, I feel so old. Okay, but basically we were born in a time, I would assume, where the country was in a very different space, right? And its history, which I don't think anybody here should deny, was one of racial segregation and actual institutional racism, insofar as you could point to a piece of legislation. Some might argue you can do that today, but we'll get into that also, that, sought to choose winners and losers in society and oppress one over the other. So no one's denying apartheid and colonialism's terrible legacy and just the terrible nature of it back then. The question, therefore, with that long-winded intro is, on an individual level, have either of you guys experienced racism? And if you have, what was that experience?
I would say I have a couple of times. For example, going to a farm with my grandmother to buy cattle, for example. The farmer decides my grandmother was obviously someone who couldn't walk properly. She was limping. And then this guy decided that to put us, both of us, on the back of the buggy as we went from where the residence was to where the cattle itself was. So there's been countless small incidents like that. And so I have had some experience, but obviously my parents have had it much worse. My father used to tell me some really shocking stories.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and my mother, my grandmother, so like the previous generation has had it much worse.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I'll get back to these and I'll show you where I'm going with this. But Dumo, on your side, have you ever experienced a racist incident that actually made you go, damn, that was racist? Have you ever experienced racism?
Yeah, I have. There have been incidents where, I was in school and there were people from another particular race that referred to me as a baboon. So that was quite hurtful. But at that particular point in time, I felt really angry. But then you get over it and you're like, it's those guys. They're just racist, whatever. As they say, sticks and stones. So,
sadly, today they don't say that. Now exactly. Words. Oh my goodness, give me a safe space. I hear you guys, and the reason why I'm asking, and I really wanted to zoom in a little bit on this, and this will be, I think, the critical difference between the difference between how an identitarian would view having heard these two stories versus how someone who views people as individuals would. From your individual experiences, do you then ascribe that everybody who is, maybe the person who was racist to you was white, or maybe they were Indian or whatever, would you then ascribe a sense of, because that incident happened to me, all individuals of that hue, all individuals of that income group, all individuals, whatever the particular identity marker was, are like that they are racist, that they are, would you then make that logic leap?
Well, because, the way we make decisions as human beings is on the basis of experience. And so in terms of just my personal experience, the vast majority of people of other races, white, Indian, colored, that I've met have been good people. And so if I'm being more intellectually honest, then I couldn't ascribe that to people of other because of the people I've met.
Absolutely. And this is the point I was trying to get at, is that we now live in an age where actually we are expected, because of that individual experience, to then say, well, that experience speaks to the whole spectrum of what our society is. It's this deeply racist, according to identitarians at least. It's on the cusp of a race war. It's just one little incident, and we're about to lose our minds and start picking up pangas and killing each other based on race. And you see this, especially on social media, because unfortunately, as social media accentuates some of the worst attributes of people. You'll have a racist incident happen, like Vicky, I forget her surname, Momberg, right? Vicky Momberg, absolutely appalling human being, right? You know, what she said was absolutely unacceptable, but speaks to her prejudice, right? Like when I listen to that, I go, wow, this person's actually a bit of a racist asshole. I didn't then suddenly think, hey, the person sitting next to me in the bus, you know, who happened to be Khalid, I think at the time, you know, maybe they think the same thing of me, or the white person standing in, because I was in the bus in Cape Town. It was my city buses when I first heard and sort of saw this on my phone. I didn't then suddenly think that individuals in that bus in that particular space of a different race were going to channel a Vicky Momberg and just suddenly look at me and go, "We've been waiting for you." You know, like
no. You know what?
like,
I think the point that you raise is
Absolutely.
very, very important, because what it points to is that you, as a self-confident young man, okay, we'll call you young, even though you're from the 80s.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
As a self-confident young man, we would look at this and say, okay, no, it's Vicky Momberg, she's crazy, she's racist.
Absolutely.
But then someone who is insecure inside,
Yep.
someone who really
That's the
doesn't believe that they are worth anything, they are going to see one racist person of another race, let's say whites, and then they are going to start making excuses for why their life is the way it is based on the other white people they've interacted with.
And I often find that that's often the case, right? And I'm going to be a controversial here because I'm in a safe space for it. You know, I often listen to these identitarians, especially the woke types, the ones those black individuals who self-identify as woke, but still trade on the basis of race and identity. And I go, what's going on here? Like I'm very certain of who I am. I'm a proud Zulu gentleman, you know, from KZN. I know who I am culturally. I know my people. You know, I often say to people, hey, I'm Zulu, man. I come from a warrior stock of individuals, and a nation, really, you know, a nation of individuals. I know who I am with great certainty. And at no basis, or I have no basis, therefore, to then take on a black nationalist messaging that views me as a victim, as an inherent victim, that somehow the world is out to get me simply because I'm black. Because I juxtapose that narrative, that identitarian narrative, that culturally Marxist narrative, if you will, which basically suggests that no, because you're black, you come with a whole bunch, a checklist of things that make you a victim. I juxtapose that against what I, as an individual, have built my identity around: black, Zulu, KZN resident, or grew up in KZN, strong Gobese family, strong Gobese clan, and, you know, becoming a Jew. And I go, I know who I am, like with great certainty. I don't need that narrative that paints me as a victim. But it seems to be thrown on us, Dumo, doesn't it? The idea that, no, you must accept that you're a victim.
Yeah. Well, from a political point of view, or from a race hustler's point of view, it's
race hustlers, I like that.
It's very politically expedient, because you tapping into the emotions of people. You're using their experiences as a means to push your narrative. And, you know, and also at the same time, I mean, if someone, you know, has experienced a racist incident, and they were on the wrong side of it, what actually happens is that if they meet the wrong people, they will say, no, it's because, you know, all white people are racist, or so many people are racist. And because of that, they're out there to get you. And it's very easy to believe that, because I don't know why, if it's the human psyche or whatever, but we just like to not put the blame on ourselves, and then put them on other people. And I don't know why it's like that, but that seems to be exploited a lot by the race hustlers. I mean, if you look at that whole EFF incident, and I don't know when it was, when that person wore that jersey that said "coolest monkey in the jungle," and then they jumped into
what's
the
that
store.
H&M.
H&M, yeah.
And then they just trashed the store.
They trashed the store. For what reason? Even though the mother of that kid was like, I saw everything beforehand and everything was good.
That was the best, wasn't it? Exactly. When the mama, she was like, why are we freaking out, people? Like this.
Exactly.
I was there.
Exactly. And the EFF just jumped on it because why? It's political expedience.
Absolutely.
Also takes me back to Thomas Sowell's book called Black Rednecks and White Liberals. Mm-hmm. And then I'm just paraphrasing, but what he said, which is very interesting, was that it's very easy, like when you want to prove yourself as a person, you know, and move up there, you have to keep on proving yourself. But then when you make yourself a victim, you don't have to do anything else. You just sit back and become a victim. But eventually those excuses become stale over time. And I think that now South Africa, well, a lot of South Africans are starting to wake up to that and starting to see that these excuses are becoming stale. So yeah, I mean, I just think for me personally, you know, this whole race identity and all of that is politically expedient, and people and politicians exploiting actually. And they always say that businesses exploit the workers, but I think it's the politicians actually exploiting people, using their experiences as a means to push their political views.
That's a very weird thing. And maybe as we sort of segue to another topic, what I found incredibly insulting and really weird, man, really weird, is the expectation. It's almost like they will look at you with starry eyes to say, please tell me about your victimhood. Like tell me more. Like, how can we have a little circle of victimhood that we can just share stories in? Hence this notion of safe spaces, right? It comes from this nonsense. And, you know, I say this because I'm going to be putting out an episode on the Big Liberty show when I was at Stellenbosch, and I was with a group of chaps there, the house committee for one of the residences called Dagbreek. And they invited me down there to hold a Change My Mind type event on campus. It was wonderfully attended, you know, in excess of, at one point, 300 plus students, you know, form, you know, a little, and, you know, I was so encouraged to see, firstly, the numbers. That to me told a story that, these students for a very long time had felt like they couldn't come to open debate, because the format was, I basically said, guys, here's a space, a safe space, really, for dangerous ideas. If you want to have a say, we used to do this a lot in my day at university. Okay, now I sound old. But I used to do this, you know, at UKZN when I was there, a soapbox, right? You'd stand on a soapbox, you'd say whatever you want to say, you'd be challenged by those who are around you. If they want to challenge you, some would agree, yay. So would say, no, why are you saying that, boo? But free speech was super important to those of us who lean on the side of individual freedom, because it meant you could challenge even authoritarian systems, whether it's what we considered back then a university management or a broader level government, right? And actually get ideas out, new ideas out to people. So let me bring it back to Stellenbosch. You know, so I was encouraged to see like 300 students who I think for a very long time had not seen this, because they were so used to those identitarian groupings that often belong to leftist organizations, Abo Sasco, PASMA, blah, blah, blah. And ironically enough, and you guys will see this once the episode airs, towards the end of the event, those PASMA types tried to disrupt the event. And I was very quick to check them. I don't think students had ever seen that. They were so used to saying, oh, okay, yes, sorry, man. You know, we respect your space. We respect your victimhood, essentially. And it was very different for them to see, you know, Big Daddy actually walk up to someone and saying, excuse me, do you have something to say? I think all of us would love to hear it, right? You combated their culture of closing debate and shutting down things by saying, actually, like sunlight, it's a fantastic disinfectant. I want you to come up here and be heard, so that everybody here can also challenge you and your ideas. That was very different, I think. And they suddenly realized, though, the identitarians, at least, the social justice wimps, as I call them, because they formed a little group amongst the sea of students who were just saying, finally, we're having open debates on this campus. Guys, let me shift us a little bit to just something that's been topical for a while. EWC, guys, expropriation without compensation. We began this conversation by speaking about the dangers of giving government too much power, essentially authoritarian power, which comes inherently with being a government, because, you know, your power is backed by state guns, essentially. Your thoughts on EWC? Should our politicians be heading in this direction?
Definitely not. It is... If EWC proceeds and goes ahead and becomes part of the constitution is eventually changed, it will be the biggest mistake that has ever been made since apartheid fell. And I think that this will end liberty as we know it in South Africa. Because if you think about property deeply and what it is the very foundation of freedom itself. Because everything that you own, yourself, your thoughts, your internal self, and then everything external to that, everything that is outside of that, you can only own by having the right to own as property, to having that recognized right that can be that should be unassailable. Even I obviously I don't even believe in expropriation with compensation.
Yes,
because I still think that it's a bridge too far. But even this is at least in that case with expropriation with compensation, at least we know that it's basically a global norm. Even though I don't like it, but it's some of the freer countries in the world practice it. But taking this one extra step.
America is one of them, for example, with what's it called? Eminent domain.
Eminent domain, yes. Canada, UK, all of them have it.
Yep.
So, but without removing compensation, means that your property rights is not recognized at all. The aspects of compensation was meant to recognize your property rights, saying, okay, this is yours. We can't just take it without exchanging anything for it.
That's right.
We have to give you something to recognize that you had an ownership over this. Removing that will basically mean that whatever is taken away from you was never really yours.
Absolutely. And I don't think a lot of people realize that it's more than just land. Yeah. Umpiake made a very important point. The idea that there are many things that you manifest from your being that are your property, your ideas, your if you have a business idea, for example, and you take the initiative, you put in the work, you start a business, the proceeds of that are your property, essentially. If you get money for that, that's your property. Politicians seem to be going after that, aren't they?
Yeah, and I think it's because of the fact that, they desire more power, and they convince people that, look, the government needs more power to, instill this utopia. And obviously that's a lie. I mean, the reality is that if you look at all the these countries that are like in the top 10 of the Heritage Foundation's economic freedom rankings, they all have a strong protection of private property.
Absolutely.
Rights. And it's important that it has to be protected, because if you allow the government to take your land or your property away without compensation, it's theft. You're telling the government that they can steal whatever. And also, it's also like, as libertarians will always say that taxation is theft, and that's what I think EWC is in a nutshell. So I think personally as well, I mean, because of this whole emotion of what happened in the past, there was segregation, there was land theft, there was all of that going on, and I'm not denying that. But the problem is that I think the solution is inadequate, or sometimes some people even say there really isn't a problem. All you just need to do is just make property more readily available. I mean, the government could have bought land and given guys title deeds. I haven't seen them doing that. They've also pushed this whole land restitution process, which I think is also good as well.
No, I agree. Yeah. I mean, just to quickly make a point on that, I've often said on other platforms, I have no problem with land restitution. That is a matter of justice. That is a matter of a rule of law.
Yes, exactly.
If you can prove that something which was of your property historically was dispossessed, or you're dispossessed of it through force, then absolutely, that very same government, even if it's held, a different grouping exercises the levers of the power, that same government to me is still responsible. It must it must restitute the past errors. And the best way to do that is, in my view, willing buyer, willing seller was the most effective means. If you literally had a government that devoted resources towards that process, because that's the real issue. Government wasn't really devoting resources to the willing buyer, willing seller principle. And we can demonstrate this in hard numbers and hard facts.
Yeah.
I led a petition, or the handing over of a petition, 160,000 names to the union buildings a couple of weeks ago, 4 weeks ago or so. There was 160,000 plus South Africans, people like you and me, who said no to EWC. And the premise for that was an important one. It was the idea that actually, firstly, politicians have not been taking land restitution seriously. They spend less on land restitution than they do on their personal VIP protection. A lot of people don't know that. I think it's a difference between 2.6 billion and 2.7 billion.
Sure.
The numbers might not be accurate, but like it's somewhere around that range. I'll correct it on the screen. So they spend more on their own personal security, those guys in the black suits and the sunglasses, than on actually justice, land justice, and this notion of land hunger in inverted commas that they speak about. So one has to wonder, really, are they taking it seriously? So that when the same politicians come to us and say, hey guys, willing buyer, willing seller has failed, I think South Africans need to ask the question, hey man, have you actually even been taking it seriously, to be honest?
Some will even suggest that, well, how do you describe failure in this? Because anyone can make a policy look like a failure if they make the standards very high, and they can make it look like a success if the standards are very low. And I think in this case, they made the standards extremely high, and they said, oh, it failed. And then therefore EWC, which I think was rushed and, in my opinion, not the well thought of.
You know, the really sad thing is, land restitution shouldn't be a difficult thing.
Yeah,
it shouldn't be like this overly bureaucratic process. It really should be a case of, look, and again, I speak in simplistic terms. I understand that, you know, on a practical level, one still has to do the work of, you know, finding out where the land is.
Yes.
Is there any sort of tangible historical record to prove a land claim and blah, blah, blah. Absolutely, I get that. But I am of the view that you could have made this process easier had you done less of the statism, less of the bureaucracy, and more of the actually, let's even get for example, market players who are driven by incentive to do the research, do the digging, do the investigative work, produce a body of evidence, if you will, which can be then put before a judge who then arbitrates that, yes, this claim is valid. Here you go. Compensation either to the victim insofar as cash. If some people choose cash, maybe they don't want the land.
Yeah.
Or hey, bringing back the land under their custodianship, and I mean under people's custodianship, not the state, not even those of us who have a king. I also don't believe the king should be owning people's land on their behalf. People must own their own lands. Families, individuals must own their own land. Anyway, you know, or alternatively, you know, taking the land back and getting the land back with title. And yes, compensating the individual who's lost out. And I'll tell you why I believe that is and compensating a market value included. The state was the dispossessor of people in this country. It wasn't individuals necessarily. Yes, you can go back in the historical record and find some individuals in the past who did it. And I think in those instances, if a judge decides there shouldn't be compensation, so be it. But it should be a judicial process, not a political process where someone galvanizes that sort of rhetoric in order to gain votes. But I don't know. What do you guys think about that? Am I being a statist in this?
No,
be honest.
No, certainly not. I think the land restitution program is incredibly important. So one of there's an article that I wrote on for City Press. Basically, I looked at the two motives.
I read that. It's very good.
For the two motives put forward for land for doing EWC.
Yeah.
The first was restitution motive, and then what the data actually shows, if you go into it, is that the restitution program has been one of the more successful post-apartheid programs that South Africa has embarked on. Where if you just look at the stats, 93% of the claims, the original claims, I think they were opened from 1996 to 1998 or something like that. 93% of those claims have been settled. It means those people have gotten joy, they've either gotten money or they've gotten their land back.
Yeah. And
so those people are happy. It's only 7% of the outstanding claims that still need to be settled. And now there's another, and then there's another justification given, which is a redistribution justification, which means there's too few land in black people's hands, too much land in white people's hands.
And that's politics to me. That's just politics. Yeah. But sorry.
Yeah. So this land redistribution program is just there's no data for that. First of all, no one knows how much white people own, how much black people know, and in principle, it is essentially unknowable. Just because of the nature of ownership, people can own things through corporations
and through trusts. Absolutely. Absolutely.
A lot of ways of owning things. What we can calculate is how much land government owns.
Yeah.
And some of the numbers that I've seen, of course, it will need to be reviewed by other people. But one of the numbers that I see by a researcher, I think Bechelt Gildenhuys, he's a map maker. He was able to get some GIS data about how much government land is. He looked at homelands, the former homelands. He looked at municipalities. He looked at game parks and things like that, and he came to a number which is 42.7% of South Africa is state-owned. So if you think about it, that's 4 out of 10% of the area of South Africa. If it's owned by the state, And even if just 10% of the rest, 10% of South Africa is owned by private black individuals, then you have state plus black land being the majority of land. And so if government wants to make sure that black people are the majority owners of land, they can just simply take the land that's within their hands and just give it out to black
Absolutely. And that's what, when you then put that to politicians who are obviously panning for power, they go, oh, hang on. That's hang on now, don't talk about giving these people land and actual ownership. And then you go, so that's the real issue.
Exactly.
The real issue is you don't want to give people land. You don't want to give people the dignity of owning their own piece of Africa, if you will. You want to control their lives. Guys, as we conclude, I think we've sort of hit the hour mark. And maybe let me set the scene for where the show will go. I'm hoping the show will be once a week, but we'll see how it goes. And we'll in other shows we'll have a guest. The guest won't necessarily be someone who leans on the side of liberty, but I want this platform to be one in which 4 individuals who are black. And said to be the same, can actually debate issues and debate them honestly, and show the different and the divergence in our thought. And on that basis, I hope you guys have enjoyed the show. Let me say thank you to the gentlemen for joining me today in this first show. Guys, thank you so much. I really do appreciate it. I'll be seeing you quite often and quite regularly, hopefully. That was Mpiake Gamini from the Free Market Foundation, and Dumodenga, who you will catch on his podcast, the Man Patria. Is that right?
That's correct.
And you'll find that online. Just search Man Patria. Guys, before I let you go, do you want to just shout out your social media? How can people find you?
On Twitter, my handle is Turing_1991, and on Facebook, just search for Mpiake Lamini with an H.
There you go. I will put that. Excuse me. I will put those details on the screen. Dumo, how do we find you on socials?
Okay, so on Facebook, it's Dumodenga. Just type that in, and then on Instagram, it's also at Dumodenga, and then Twitter at Dumodenga, and then there's also the Man Patria page as well on Twitter, which is Man Patria _ZA, and on Facebook, it's Man Patria ZA. Yeah.
Awesome. Guys, thank you so much for joining me. And thank you for watching. This has been an interesting conversation for me, and something I really wanted to get started so that we can actually have very different conversations for a change in this country. Guys, remember, you can always support the Big Liberty Show by becoming a friend of the IRR. You can do that by SMSing your name to 32823. Terms and conditions to apply. Each SMS will cost you R1. And you can join the other South Africans who are beginning to donate between 70 and 90 Rand towards the show. And of course to the IRR. If you don't like SMSs, maybe you're one of those tech-savvy ones. I've already been accused of being old on the show. You can find us online at www.irr.org.za/join. Guys, thank you so much for watching. This has been an episode of the Big Liberty Show, Blacks Only. I'll see you guys on the next one.